Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is asking for help when you have nothing left to give. For Rylan, a single father barely keeping his small repair shop alive, walking into that millionaire's home took every ounce of courage he had. He came asking for a helping hand. Instead, Cassian threw a glass of water in his face and laughed. It was meant to be a private moment of cruelty, a joke between the wealthy man and his fiancée. But when that footage leaked online, the world saw everything. The mockery that was supposed to break one man became the moment that exposed a millionaire's true character. How did one act of humiliation turn into justice for a struggling father? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the small apartment above Rylan's auto repair shop, casting pale shadows across the worn wooden floor. He'd been awake for 20 minutes already, lying still and listening to the sounds of the neighborhood coming to life, delivery trucks rumbling past, the bakery across the street rolling up its metal gate, Mrs. Bat's television murmuring through the wall. These were the sounds that marked the beginning of every day, familiar as his own heartbeat. He turned his head to look at the photograph on the nightstand. Allison smiled back at him, frozen in a moment 3 years gone, her dark hair catching the sunlight at the beach, Penny balanced on her hip. The photo had faded slightly, the colors not quite as vibrant as they used to be, but her smile remained the same. Some mornings it felt like she'd just stepped out of the room. Other mornings, like this one, the absence felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. Rylan pushed himself up and swung his legs over the side of the bed. No time for dwelling. Penny would be awake soon, and she needed breakfast, a packed lunch, her homework checked one more time. The routine was what kept them moving forward. He patted down the short hallway in his socks, pausing outside Penny's door to listen. Still asleep, good. She needed every minute of rest she could get. At 8 years old, she carried more worry in those young eyes than any child should have to. She never complained, not really, but he saw it. The way she looked at other kids with their new backpacks and name-brand shoes, the way she said, "It's okay, Dad," when he explained they couldn't afford the field trip or the birthday party at the skating rink. The kitchen was small, just enough room for a two-person table and a narrow counter. Rylan filled the coffee maker with water, measured out the grounds, half a scoop less than he used to use, making the can last longer, and hit the button. While it gurgled and hissed, he pulled open the refrigerator. Eggs, bread, a container of leftover pasta, milk that would last another 2 days if they were careful. He'd need to do a grocery run this weekend, which meant juggling which bills could wait another week. He cracked 3 eggs into a bowl, whisked them with a fork, and poured them into the pan. The sizzle filled the quiet kitchen. Toast popped up. He buttered it lightly, divided the eggs onto 2 plates, and called down the hallway. "Penny, sweetheart." "Time to get up." A muffled groan answered him, followed by the creak of bed springs. Rylan smiled despite himself. She was never a morning person, just like her mother. 10 minutes later, Penny shuffled into the kitchen in her pajamas, her sandy blonde hair sticking up at odd angles, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She climbed into her chair and stared at the plate in front of her with the vague confusion of someone not quite awake yet. "Morning." "Sunshine," Rylan said, setting a glass of orange juice beside her plate. "Morning," she mumbled, picking up her fork. He sat across from her with his own plate and coffee, watching as she slowly came to life, bite by bite. These quiet morning moments were precious. No television, no distractions, just the two of them sharing breakfast before the day pulled them in different directions. "You have your spelling test today, right?" he asked. Penny nodded, swallowing. "Mrs. Keller says if I get all of them right, I get to pick a book from the prize box. You'll do great. We practiced those words for a week. Will you be able to pick me up after school?" Rylan hesitated. He had 3 cars scheduled in the shop today, and old Mr. Peterson's truck was still waiting for parts. "Mrs. Bat is going to walk over and get you, okay? I'll be done by dinner time." "Okay." Penny took another bite of eggs, then looked up at him. "Dad, yeah? Why does Mrs. Bat always help us? Doesn't she have her own family? The question caught him off guard, as her questions often did. Her kids are all grown up and live far away. I think she likes having you around. You remind her of her grandkids. Oh, Penny seemed to consider this. I like her too. She makes good cookies. After breakfast, the morning routine continued its familiar rhythm. Penny got dressed while Rylan packed her lunch. Peanut butter sandwich, an apple, a handful of pretzels, a juice box. He checked her backpack, made sure her homework folder was inside, found her jacket hanging on the back of her door. She brushed her teeth while he ran a comb through her hair, working out the tangles as gently as he could. By 7:45, they were walking down the stairs that led from the apartment to the shop below. The space smelled of motor oil and metal, a scent that Rylan had known his entire life. His father had run this shop before him, and his grandfather before that. 3 generations of honest work, of keeping the neighborhood's cars running, of building trust one repair at a time. The shop wasn't much to look at. 2 bays, both with hydraulic lifts that had seen better days. A small office area with a desk buried under invoices and work orders. Pegboard walls covered in tools, some of them older than Rylan himself. In the corner, hanging on a hook, was his father's leather tool belt, worn smooth by decades of use, the pockets shaped by the wrenches and screwdrivers that had lived there. Rylan wore his own belt now, but he kept his father's close, a reminder of the man who'd taught him everything he knew about engines and integrity. Jordan was already there, sweeping out the first bay. The kid was 17, tall and lanky, with an earnest face and a willingness to learn that reminded Rylan of himself at that age. His mother worked 2 jobs and couldn't afford to pay for technical school, so Rylan had taken him on as an apprentice 6 months ago. The pay wasn't much, barely anything really, but Jordan showed up every day on time and worked hard. "Morning, boss," Jordan said, looking up from his sweeping. "Morning. That brake job from yesterday ready for pickup?" "Finished it first thing. Keys are on your desk." "Good work." Rylan walked Penny out to the sidewalk. The school was 4 blocks away, close enough that they could walk on nice days. She slipped her hand into his, and they started down the street together, passing familiar storefronts, the bakery, the laundromat, the bodega, run by the Vasquez family. People waved. Penny waved back. At the school entrance, he knelt down to her level, straightened her jacket, and tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear. "You're going to do great on that test." "I know," she said with a smile that was pure Allison. "I love you." "Sweetheart, love you too, Dad." He watched her walk through the doors, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders before turning back toward the shop. The weight of the day settled onto him with each step. 3 years since Allison died, and he was still barely keeping his head above water. The medical bills had consumed their savings first, then forced him to take out loans he could barely service. The shop made enough to cover rent and utilities, to keep food on the table and Penny in clothes that fit, but there was never anything left over. No cushion, no room for error, and errors, he'd learned, were inevitable. Back at the shop, Jordan had the first car already lifted, a Honda with a grinding noise in the front left wheel. Rylan pulled on his work gloves and got to work, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of diagnosis and repair. This was where he felt most competent, most in control. Engines made sense. They had rules. If something was broken, you could fix it. If a part was worn out, you replaced it. Cause and effect. Problem and solution. If only the rest of life worked the same way. By noon, they'd finished the Honda and started on a Chevy Tahoe that needed new spark plugs. Rylan was elbow deep in the engine compartment when he heard the groan and shudder from the other bay. He turned just in time to see the hydraulic lift holding Mr. Peterson's truck give one final wheeze and stop moving entirely. Frozen halfway between the ground and full extension, his stomach dropped. Jordan looked over, wrench in hand. "Boss, what was that?" Rylan walked over to the control panel, pressed buttons, flipped switches. Nothing. The lift was dead, and Mr. Peterson's truck was stuck in the air, unreachable. He'd been nursing this lift along for 2 years, patching it, coaxing it, praying it would last just a little bit longer. It had finally given up. "Can you fix it?" Jordan asked, hovering nearby. Rylan ran a hand through his hair, his mind already calculating costs he couldn't afford. I can try. But if the hydraulic cylinder is shot, we're looking at a replacement. He spent the rest of the afternoon lying on his back under the lift, testing connections, checking fluid levels, searching for any problem that might be fixable with the tools and skills he had. But he knew, even as he worked, that this was beyond his ability to patch. The cylinder was cracked. The whole system would need to be replaced. By the time he had to leave to meet Penny at home, his hands were black with grease, and his mind was churning through impossible math. A new lift would cost $8,000, maybe more. He had $2,000 in the bank. The bank had already turned him down for a loan once last year. He couldn't ask Mrs. Bat. She lived on Social Security. He didn't have family, not anymore. Penny was waiting at the kitchen table when he came upstairs, working on a drawing while Mrs. Bat sat beside her, reading a magazine. All 20s correct on her spelling test, Mrs. Bat announced, beaming. And she picked a book about horses. That's my girl, Rylan said, managing a smile. Thank you, Mrs. Bat. I really appreciate it. Any time, dear. You know that. The elderly woman gathered her things and headed for the door, pausing to pat his arm. You look tired. Don't forget to take care of yourself, too. After she left, Rylan made dinner, the leftover pasta, heated up and stretched with some frozen vegetables. Penny chatted about her day, about the book she'd won, about her friend Chris, who had brought cupcakes for his birthday. Rylan listened, nodded, responded when appropriate. But part of his mind was still downstairs, still staring at that broken lift and the bills it represented. That evening, after Penny was in bed, Rylan sat at his desk in the shop's small office and stared at the numbers. He'd run them 5 different ways, and they all came out the same. Without that lift, he couldn't take jobs. Without jobs, he couldn't pay rent. Without rent, they'd lose the shop and the apartment above it. He thought about his father, about the tool belt hanging on the wall. What would his old man have done? His father had never asked anyone for help, had always found a way through hard work and determination. But his father had also lived in a different time, when a man could support his family on honest work alone. Rylan pulled out his laptop and started searching. There had to be someone, somewhere, who might be willing to help a struggling small business. He found articles about local philanthropists, business owners who claimed to believe in supporting the community. One name kept appearing, Cassian Sterling. Sterling was everywhere, in the business section of the local news, on billboards advertising his development projects, in photos at charity galas. Self-made millionaire, the article said. Pulled himself up from nothing, believed in giving back to the community. Rylan stared at Sterling's photo, handsome in an artificial way, perfect teeth, perfect hair, standing in front of one of his luxury developments. Could he really walk into this man's world and ask for help? He looked at the photo of Allison on the desk, then up at the ceiling toward where Penny slept. For her, he could swallow his pride. For her, he could do anything. He began composing an email, choosing each word carefully, explaining his situation without sounding desperate, emphasizing that he wasn't looking for a handout, but rather an investment in a proven business, a partnership that could benefit them both. It took him an hour to write 3 paragraphs. He read them over 10 times before finally, hand hovering over the mouse, clicking send, the email disappeared into the void of the internet. Rylan sat back in his chair, exhausted, doubtful, but having done the only thing he could think to do. Upstairs, through the floorboards, he could hear Penny's gentle breathing, the sound of her turning over in sleep. He saved the spreadsheet, closed his laptop, and headed upstairs to try to get some rest himself. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to tell Mr. Peterson his truck was stuck in the air. Tomorrow he'd call around about used lifts, about loans, about anything that might keep them afloat a little bit longer. But tonight, he'd done all he could. He just hoped it would be enough. 3 days passed with no response. Rylan had almost convinced himself that the email had been ignored, deleted by some assistant who screened out desperate pleas from strangers. He'd started calling around to equipment suppliers, getting quotes on used lifts. contemplating how he might piece together enough credit from various sources to make something work. Then, on Thursday afternoon, while he was underneath a Subaru changing oil, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He wiped his hands on a rag and pulled it out, squinting at the screen. An email from Sterling Industries. His heart picked up speed as he opened it. The message was brief, professional, typed by someone named Vanessa Ortiz, who identified herself as Mr. Sterling's executive assistant. Mr. Sterling had reviewed his inquiry and was interested in discussing the matter further. Would Rylan be available for dinner at Mr. Sterling's residence this Saturday evening at 7? Rylan read it twice, then a third time. Dinner at his residence. That seemed oddly personal for a business discussion, but who was he to question how millionaires conducted their affairs? Maybe Sterling preferred to meet potential investments in a more casual setting. Maybe this was a good sign, an indication of genuine interest rather than a formal brush-off. He typed back a response accepting the invitation, trying to match the professional tone, then spent the next 10 minutes staring at his phone, wondering if he'd just made the right decision or a terrible mistake. Saturday arrived with the weight of expectation. Rylan had told Penny he had an important business meeting, making it sound routine so she wouldn't worry. Mrs. Batt agreed to stay with her for the evening, waving away his thanks as she always did. He showered, shaved carefully, and pulled out the one decent button-down shirt he owned, a pale blue Oxford that Alison had bought him for their anniversary 4 years ago. It was slightly faded now, the collar showing wear, but it was clean and pressed. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, he barely recognized himself. When had the lines around his eyes gotten so deep? When had the grey started threading through his hair at the temples? He looked older than 36, worn down by years of carrying weight that never seemed to get lighter. You look nice. Dad, Penny said from the doorway, making him jump. Thank you, sweetheart. He knelt down and kissed her forehead. Be good for Mrs. Batt, okay? I'll be home before bedtime. Is this meeting going to help the shop? The question, asked with such innocent hope, nearly broke him. I hope so, Penny. I really hope so. The drive to Sterling's neighborhood took 40 minutes, each mile marking a transition into a different world. The buildings grew larger, the lawns more manicured, the cars and driveways worth more than Rylan made in a year. By the time he turned onto Riverside Heights, where Sterling's property sat behind iron gates and mature trees, he felt like he'd crossed into foreign territory. The address led him to a circular driveway in front of a house that could only be called a mansion. Pale stone, massive windows, a fountain in the center of the drive. Rylan parked his 15-year-old pickup truck next to a sleek black Mercedes and a white Tesla, feeling acutely aware of the rust spots on his bumper and the crack in his windshield. He sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, gathering courage. You're here for Penny, he reminded himself. You're here for the shop, for your father's legacy, for everything you've built. Swallow your pride and do what needs to be done. He climbed out, tugged his shirt straight, and walked to the front door. Before he could knock, it opened to reveal a woman in her 30s wearing a crisp pantsuit. Vanessa Ortiz, he assumed. Mr. Rylan. Please come in. Mr. Sterling is expecting you. The interior of the house matched the exterior's opulence. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that looked expensive even to Rylan's untrained eye. Everything gleamed, everything was placed with precision. Everything spoke of money that had never known want or worry. Vanessa led him through a hallway and into a dining room that could have seated 20 people comfortably. The table was set at one end with 3 place settings: fine china, multiple glasses, silverware that caught the light from an overhead chandelier. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto gardens lit by subtle landscape lighting. Please have a seat, Vanessa said, gesturing to one of the chairs. Mr. Sterling will be with you shortly. Can I get you something to drink? Water would be fine, thank you. She nodded and disappeared through another doorway. Rylan sat down, his chair creaking slightly despite its obvious quality, and tried not to touch anything. He felt out of place, in a way that went beyond economics. This was a different species of existence, one he'd only ever seen in movies or magazines. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, confident and unhurried. A man appeared in the doorway, and Ryland stood automatically. Cassian Sterling looked exactly like his photos, but somehow more so in person. Tall, athletic build, dark hair styled with precision, wearing slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Calculated casual, the kind of relax that cost money to achieve. His watch alone probably cost more than Ryland's truck. Ryland, is it? Sterling extended his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Cassian Sterling, thanks for coming out this way. Thank you for having me. Mr. Sterling, I really appreciate you taking the time. Just Cassian. Please. He gestured for Ryland to sit back down as a woman entered the room behind him. She was striking. Designer dress, jewelry that sparkled, long dark hair styled in waves. This is Talia, my fiancée. Talia, this is the gentleman I mentioned. Pleasure, Talia said, her voice smooth and cool. She took the seat beside Cassian, across from Ryland, and fixed him with an appraising look that made him feel like a specimen under glass. Vanessa returned with water glasses, set them down, and vanished again. Cassian leaned back in his chair, studying Ryland with an expression that might have been interest or might have been amusement. So, Cassian said, swirling the wine in his glass, you have an auto repair shop. Family business, you said in your email. Yes, sir. 3 generations. My grandfather started it in 1962, my father ran it after him, and I've been running it for the last 12 years. And you're having some financial difficulties. The blunt statement made Ryland's cheeks warm, but he pushed through. I had some unexpected medical expenses a few years back. My wife, she passed away from cancer, and I've been working to recover since then. The business itself is sound. We have steady customers, a good reputation in the community. But I need to replace some equipment to keep operating, and the banks won't extend me credit. How much are we talking about? Talia asked, her tone suggesting she was asking about the price of groceries. $8,000 for the hydraulic lift. With that, I could continue taking jobs, maintain my income, and eventually expand. I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Sterling. I'm proposing an investment, a partnership even. I'd be willing to discuss profit-sharing arrangements or $8,000, Cassian interrupted, glancing at Talia with a look Ryland couldn't quite read. That's what you came here for? $8,000? I know it might not seem like much to you, but for my business, it's the difference between surviving and closing. I've built something valuable, something that serves the community. I just need a bridge to get through this rough patch. Cassian took a sip of his wine, letting the silence stretch. Ryland could feel sweat forming on his back, despite the house's perfect climate control. Something in the air had shifted, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly when or how. Tell me something, Cassian said finally, setting down his glass. How did you end up in this situation? I mean, really, because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've had 12 years to build something sustainable, and instead you're here begging for money you should have saved. The words hit like a slap. It wasn't a matter of saving. The medical bills, right, your wife. Tragic, I'm sure. But that was 3 years ago, you said. What have you been doing since then? Working hard? He made air quotes around the words. Because the thing is, Ryland, hard work is what people say when they don't want to admit they're not smart enough to work strategically. Ryland felt his jaw tighten. I provide an honest service. I keep my prices fair. I help my neighbors, and that's adorable, truly, Talia chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. Very noble. But nobility doesn't pay bills, does it? I came here in good faith, Ryland said, forcing his voice to stay level. I thought your reputation, the articles about your philanthropy, I thought you might understand what it's like to struggle, to need a helping hand. Cassian laughed then, a sharp bark of amusement. Is that what you thought? That I got where I am by asking for handouts? He leaned forward, his smile gone. Let me tell you something about success, Ryland. It's not about handouts. It's not about hard work or honesty or helping your neighbors. It's about taking what's yours, about being smart enough and tough enough to climb over everyone else. I don't believe that, Ryland said quietly. No, you wouldn't, because you're down there looking up, and from down there, everything looks impossible. Cassian reached for the water glass in front of him, his fingers wrapping around the crystal. $8,000. Do you know how much I spent on my fiancé's engagement ring? $30,000. Do you know how much this watch cost? $12,000. And you come into my home, sit at my table, and ask me for $8,000 like you deserve it just because you tried hard. The contempt in his voice was unmistakable now. Ryland's hands gripped the edge of the table. I should go. This was clearly a mistake. Oh, don't leave yet, Cassian said, and something in his tone made Ryland pause. I invited you here for a reason. I wanted to see it for myself, what failure looks like up close. And I wanted to teach you something, a lesson that might actually help you more than $8,000 ever could. Before Ryland could process what was happening, Cassian lifted the water glass and threw its contents directly into Ryland's face. The cold shock of it stole Ryland's breath. Water dripped from his hair, ran down his face, soaked into his collar, Allison's shirt, the anniversary shirt. He sat frozen, every muscle locked, as Cassian and Talia burst into laughter. Oh my God! Talia gasped between giggles, her hand over her mouth. His face! That's the lesson, Cassian said, still grinning. That's what asking for handouts gets you. Humiliation. Maybe next time you'll figure out how to stand on your own 2 feet. Ryland stood slowly, water dripping onto the marble floor. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping them at his sides, of not giving these people the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. He looked at Cassian, at Talia, at their smug faces and expensive clothes and total absence of humanity. He didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked out of the room, his wet shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. Behind him, their laughter followed, echoing off the high ceilings. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen as he found his way back to the front door and let himself out. The cool evening air hit his wet face, and he walked to his truck with as much dignity as he could muster. Climbed in and sat there for a long moment. Hands gripping the steering wheel, part of him wanted to go back in there, to tell Cassian Sterling exactly what he thought of him and his cruelty. Part of him wanted to break down, to let the humiliation wash over him completely. But he did neither. He started the truck, pulled out of the circular driveway, and headed home to his daughter, to his shop, to the life that might be, falling apart but was still his own. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the security camera mounted discreetly in the corner of that dining room had captured every moment of what had just transpired. And in 3 days, that footage would change everything. Ryland didn't tell anyone what had happened at Sterling's mansion. Not Mrs. Bat, not Jordan, and certainly not Penny. He came home that Saturday night, changed his wet shirt before his daughter could see it, and tucked her into bed with a smile that felt like it might crack his face. When she asked how the meeting went, he simply said it hadn't worked out, but they'd find another way. Sunday morning, he woke with a determination that felt like steel in his chest. He'd been humiliated, yes. He'd been treated like something less than human by a man who had more money than decency. But he was still standing. He still had his shop, his daughter, his skills. Cassian Sterling's cruelty didn't change any of that. He spent Sunday making calls to every equipment supplier within 100 miles, negotiating payment plans, explaining his situation over and over. Most said no. A few said maybe, if he could come up with half the money up front. By evening, he'd cobbled together a possibility, not a good one, but a thread of hope. If he could find $4,000 somehow, one supplier in the next county would work with him on the rest. 4,000 was still impossible, but it was less impossible than 8,000. Monday morning arrived with its usual rhythm. Ryland got Penny ready for school, made breakfast, walked her to class. When he returned to the shop, Jordan was already there, and he'd managed to rig up a temporary solution for Mr. Peterson's truck using a floor jack and some careful maneuvering. It wasn't safe for real work, but at least they could get the vehicle down and back to its owner. "You're a lifesaver," Ryland told him, and meant it. "Just trying to keep us going," Jordan said with a shy smile. "My mom asked me last night if the shop was going to close. I told her no way, that you always figure things out. The faith in the kid's voice made Ryland's throat tight. We'll figure it out, he agreed, hoping it was true. The week crawled forward. Ryland worked longer hours, took on smaller jobs he'd normally decline. Oil changes, tire rotations, anything that brought in cash. He skipped lunch most days, pocketing the money he would have spent on food. He called the landlord and negotiated a 2-week extension on rent, promising it would be there in full, with late fees. The landlord, who'd known Ryland's father, agreed reluctantly. Every night he came upstairs to Penny, helped with homework, made dinner from whatever was left in the refrigerator. She seemed to sense his stress, growing quieter, more careful around him. One evening, she brought him a drawing she'd made at school. A picture of the two of them holding hands in front of the shop. A big sun shining overhead. To make you smile, she said, pressing it into his hands. He pulled her into a hug and held on longer than usual, his eyes burning. Thank you, sweetheart. This is perfect. On Wednesday afternoon, while Ryland was replacing brake pads on an old Civic, a man he didn't recognize walked into the shop. He was in his 50s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, with a weathered face that spoke of years working outdoors. Help you? Ryland asked, wiping his hands. You're Ryland. Own this place? That's right. Name's Bernard Cross. I heard through the grapevine you might be looking to sell some equipment. That hydraulic lift, the one that's broken, you interested in parting with it for scrap? Ryland felt something sink in his chest. Word was getting around that he was in trouble. Not looking to sell. Looking to fix it? Bernard nodded slowly. Fair enough. But if you change your mind, I run a salvage yard out past Route 12. Could give you a fair price, help you get something in your pocket. I appreciate it, but no. This shop's not closing, didn't say it was. Just offering options. Bernard pulled out a business card, set it on the workbench. You change your mind, give me a call. After he left, Ryland stared at the card for a long time. The fact that salvage dealers were circling felt like a sign of how bad things had gotten, how visible his struggle had become. In a small community, everyone knew everyone else's business. People were watching, waiting to see if he'd make it or go under. That evening, Mrs. Bat knocked on his door with a container of curry and rice. Made too much, she said, though they both knew she hadn't. Thought you and Penny might enjoy it. Mrs. Bat, you don't have to? I know I don't have to. I want to. Now take it before it gets cold. After she left, Ryland stood in his kitchen holding the warm container, feeling the weight of her kindness. She lived on Social Security and a small pension from her late husband, yet she kept finding ways to help. It shamed him and humbled him in equal measure. Friday brought an unexpected visitor. Ryland was in the office, staring at his bank balance on the computer screen and trying to will the numbers to change, when a black sedan pulled up outside. A woman stepped out, professional, polished, carrying a leather briefcase. She walked into the shop with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere. Can I help you? Ryland asked, standing. Mr. Ryland? My name is Deirdre Chang. I'm an attorney here in town. She extended her hand, and he shook it automatically. I'm actually here about an unrelated matter, but I noticed your shop while driving by and thought I'd stop in. My car's been making a strange noise. Would you have time to take a quick look? It was an odd way to seek service, but Ryland wasn't in a position to turn down work. Sure, bring it around to the bay. Her car was a luxury sedan, pristine and clearly well-maintained. Ryland popped the hood and spent 15 minutes checking various systems before finding the issue. A loose belt that he tightened in under 5 minutes. How much do I owe you? Deirdre asked. No charge. Took me 2 minutes to fix, she raised an eyebrow. You should charge for your expertise, not just your time. Not how I do business. I can see that. She pulled out her wallet anyway and extracted a $50 bill, pressing it into his hand despite his protests. Consider it a tip for good service, then. And here, she handed him her business card. If you ever need legal advice, my first consultation is free. After she left, Ryland stood holding the $50 and the business card, wondering what that had been about. Lawyers didn't typically stop by random auto shops because of a noise in their engine. But he filed the card away and added the $50 to his growing fund. every dollar counting toward that impossible 4,000. That weekend, he sat down with Penny and explained, as gently as he could, that things were tight right now. They'd need to be extra careful with money for a while. No extras, no treats, just the necessities. "It's okay, Dad," she said, with that solemn maturity that broke his heart. "We have each other. That's what matters." He hugged her close, this little girl who understood too much too soon, and promised himself that somehow he'd find a way through this. He'd protect her from the worst of it, keep the shop running, honor his father's legacy. He just had no idea how Sunday evening, as Rylan was closing up the shop and preparing to head upstairs for dinner, his phone buzzed. An email notification. He almost ignored it. Most emails at this hour were spam or automated bills, but something made him check. The subject line made his blood run cold. "You should see this." The sender was anonymous, an encrypted email address that meant nothing to him. His finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won out. He opened it. There was no message, just a link to a video file hosted on a private server. His hand trembled slightly as he clicked it. The video loaded slowly, buffering, then began to play. It took him 3 seconds to recognize the dining room, the marble floors, the chandelier. Security camera footage shot from a corner he'd never noticed. There he was, sitting at that table. There was Cassian reaching for the water glass. And there, crystal clear in high definition, was the moment the water hit Rylan's face, followed by Cassian and Talia's laughter. The video was dated, time-stamped undeniable. Rylan watched it twice, his heart pounding, before the implications began to sink in. Someone had this footage. Someone was sending it to him. But why? A second email arrived as he stared at the screen. "This doesn't belong in the shadows. People should know who Cassian Sterling really is. I can make sure they do. If you want justice, reply to this email. You have 48 hours. Rylan sat down heavily in his desk chair, the phone clutched in his hand. Justice. The word felt foreign and dangerous at the same time. He thought about Cassian's face, about the humiliation, about walking out of that mansion with water dripping from his hair. He thought about Penny upstairs, about the shop, about everything hanging by a thread. What would happen if this video went public? What would it mean for him, for his daughter, for the quiet life he'd been trying so desperately to preserve? And who was this person offering to weaponize his worst moment? The questions circled in his mind as darkness fell outside, the shop growing cold around him, the decision looming like a storm on the horizon. Rylan didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his phone on the nightstand, the anonymous email burning in his mind like a brand. 48 hours to decide. But decide what exactly? Whether to allow a stranger to broadcast his humiliation to the world. Whether to seek revenge against a man who'd treated him like garbage. His father's voice echoed in his memory, "Take the high road, son." A man's character is measured by how he handles himself when he's been wronged. But his father had never faced anything like this. His father had lived in a simpler time, when dignity and hard work were enough. By Monday morning, Rylan had made no decision. He went through the motions, getting Penny ready, making breakfast, walking her to school. Jordan was already at the shop when he returned, working on a transmission job they'd started the week before. "You okay, boss?" Jordan asked, looking up from under the hood. "You seem distracted." "Just tired." "Didn't sleep well. You want me to handle the Nissan coming in at 10? "Give you a break?" Rylan shook his head. "I'm fine." "Thanks, though." But he wasn't fine. All morning as he worked, his mind circled back to that video, to those 48 hours ticking down. What did this anonymous person want from him? Why offer to help someone they'd never met? And what would the fallout be if that video went viral? At lunch, he locked himself in the office and pulled up the email again. He stared at it for 20 minutes before finally typing a response. "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then sat back and waited. The reply came within 5 minutes, faster than seemed possible. "Who I am doesn't matter. Why I'm doing this is simple. I hate bullies, and I hate people who use their wealth to crush others. Sterling is both. You're not the first person he's humiliated. You won't be the last unless someone stops him. I can give you that chance. Ryland's fingers hovered over the keyboard. I don't want revenge. I just want to support my daughter and keep my business running. Then think of it as accountability, not revenge. What Sterling did to you was wrong. He should face consequences. Right now, he's sitting in his mansion believing he can treat people however he wants, because money makes him untouchable. Prove him wrong. The words stirred something in Ryland's chest, something that felt dangerously close to anger. He thought about Cassian's smug face, about Talia's laughter, about the way they'd looked at him like he was nothing. If I agree, what happens? I post the video to social media with appropriate context. It goes viral, trust me, it will. Public opinion turns against Sterling. His reputation takes a hit. Maybe his business suffers. Maybe he learns something. At minimum, people see who he really is. And what happens to me? You become the sympathetic figure, the hard-working father who asked for help and got cruelty instead. People will want to support you. Some might even offer the help Sterling refused. It sounded too neat, too simple. Life wasn't a fairy tale where good people got rewarded and bad people got punished. What's the catch? No catch. Just a yes or no. You have 36 hours left. Ryland closed the laptop and sat in the quiet office, listening to the sounds of Jordan working in the bay beyond. Through the window he could see the street, familiar and worn, the neighborhood where he'd built his life. If this video went public, everything would change. There would be attention, scrutiny, questions. People would know his business, his struggles, his most humiliating moment. But maybe, just maybe, it would also bring the help he so desperately needed. That afternoon, Mrs. Bat stopped by with Penny after school. His daughter ran to him with a paper in her hand, waving it excitedly. "Dad, look, I got 100 on my math test!" He swept her up in a hug, examining the test with its bright red 100% at the top. "That's my girl. I'm so proud of you. Mrs. Keller said I'm the best in the class at multiplication now, because you worked hard. You earned it." Mrs. Bat watched from the doorway, smiling. After Penny ran off to show Jordan her test, the elderly woman approached Ryland quietly. "I heard Bernard Cross stopped by last week. Word really did travel fast in this neighborhood." "He did. I sent him away." "Good. This shop has been here longer than most of the buildings on this street. Your grandfather would be proud of how you've held on." "I'm not sure how much longer I can hold on, Mrs. Butt." She patted his arm with her weathered hand. "Longer than you think. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." She paused, her expression growing serious. "But Ryland, strength doesn't mean you have to do everything alone. Sometimes accepting help is the strongest thing you can do." After she left, her words lingered. Accepting help. Was that what this was? Or was it something else entirely? Using his pain as ammunition, weaponizing his humiliation for some stranger's crusade against wealthy bullies. That evening, after Penny was asleep, Ryland did something he hadn't done in months. He pulled out the old photo albums from the closet and sat on the couch, turning pages slowly. Pictures of his wedding day, Allison in her simple white dress, both of them young and hopeful. Pictures of Penny as a baby, as a toddler, at every birthday and holiday. Pictures of his father in the shop, teaching him how to diagnose an engine problem by sound alone. He found a photo of himself at Penny's age, standing next to his father, in front of this very shop. The sign had been freshly painted then, the building newer, the neighborhood more prosperous. His father's hand rested on young Ryland's shoulder, pride evident in his expression. What would his father do? The question had haunted him for days. His father had believed in dignity, in taking the high road, in never stooping to someone else's level. But his father had also believed in justice, in standing up for what was right, in protecting the innocent from the powerful. Cassian Sterling was powerful, and he was cruel, and unless someone held him accountable, he'd keep being cruel to anyone he deemed beneath him. Ryland closed the album and returned to his laptop. He opened the email chain and stared at it for a long time. His hands trembled slightly as he began to type. "I need to know this won't hurt my daughter. She's 8. She doesn't understand any of this. I need guarantees that she's protected from whatever happens." The response came quickly. Your daughter's name and image won't be mentioned. The focus will be entirely on Sterling's behavior and your dignity in the face of it. She'll be kept out of it completely." Rylan took a deep breath. "If I agree, I want one thing clear. This isn't about revenge for me. It's about accountability, about making sure powerful people can't treat others like garbage just because they can." "Understood. Is that a yes?" His finger hovered over the keyboard. This was the moment. Once he typed those 3 letters, there would be no taking them back. The video would go out into the world, carrying with it his worst moment, but maybe, just maybe, turning it into something meaningful. He thought about Cassian's face, about Talia's laughter, about the water dripping from his hair and the contempt in their eyes. He thought about Penny's drawing, about Mrs. Bat's kindness, about Jordan's faith that he'd figure things out. He thought about the shop, about his father's legacy, about 3 generations of honest work and dignity, and he typed, yes. The response was immediate. "The video goes live tomorrow at noon. Be prepared for attention. Don't talk to media unless you want to. Let the video speak for itself." "And Rylan, you did the right thing." He closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of his apartment, listening to Penny's soft breathing from her room down the hall. Had he done the right thing? He wouldn't know until tomorrow. When the world saw what Cassian Sterling had done, when public opinion weighed in, when consequences, if there were any, began to unfold, all he knew for certain was that he'd made his choice. For better or worse, the truth would come out. He went to bed that night with a strange mixture of dread and relief sitting heavy in his chest. Tomorrow everything would change. He'd either find the help he needed, or he'd become a cautionary tale about what happens when ordinary people challenge the powerful. Either way, he'd stopped running from what had happened. He'd stopped hiding his humiliation and shame, whatever came next. He'd face it the same way he'd faced everything since Allison died, one day at a time, doing his best to protect his daughter and honor the values his father had taught him. The video would go live at noon. Rylan had 11 hours to prepare himself for the storm. The morning of the video's release felt surreal. Rylan went through his usual routine, waking Penny, making breakfast, checking her homework, but everything seemed heightened, as if he were moving through a dream. At 11:45, after dropping Penny at school, he stood in his shop office with his phone in his hand. Watching the minutes tick down, Jordan was working on a brake job in the bay, oblivious to what was about to happen. Mrs. Bat was probably watching her morning shows. Penny was sitting in class learning about fractions. And somewhere across town, Cassian Sterling was going about his wealthy, cruel life, completely unaware that in 15 minutes, everything would shift. At exactly noon, Rylan's phone began to buzz. The first notification was from the anonymous sender, a link to the video, now posted on multiple social media platforms. The caption was simple and devastating. "Millionaire throws water in struggling father's face after he asked for help." This is what cruelty looks like. Rylan clicked the link with shaking hands. The video had been posted 12 seconds ago and already had 47 views. He watched those numbers climb, 60, 80, 120, as he refreshed the page. Within 2 minutes, it had been shared 17 times. By 12:15, his phone was ringing. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. Another call came immediately after. Then another. Text messages started flooding in. Some from numbers he recognized, neighbors and customers, others from strangers who'd somehow gotten his contact information. "Is this real? That's horrible what he did to you." "Stay strong, brother." Channel 7. "News would like to interview you." He silenced his phone and set it face down on the desk, his heart hammering. Jordan appeared in the doorway, his own phone in his hand, his expression shocked. "Boss, are you seeing this? Someone posted a video of you online, and it's blowing up. That guy threw water in your face." When did this happen?" "Last week, Saturday night." "Why didn't you tell me? That's assault. You should press charges or something." Rylan shook his head slowly. "I'm not pressing charges. I just want people to know what kind of man he really is." "Well, they're finding out. This thing has like 50,000 views already." 50,000. The number seemed impossible. Rylan picked up his phone again, watching the counter spin upward like a slot machine. Comments poured in beneath the video, hundreds of them, coming so fast he couldn't read them all. "This is disgusting. I'll never do business with Sterling Industries again. That poor man just wanted help for his shop. Someone start a GoFundMe for him. Cassian Sterling is trash." The support was overwhelming, almost frightening in its intensity. People were outraged on his behalf, channeling their anger toward Cassian with a ferocity Rylan hadn't anticipated. But mixed in with the support were other comments, darker ones. Probably a setup for attention. Why would a millionaire meet with some random guy? Fake news. Both sides to every story. Rylan closed the app and tried to focus on work, but concentration was impossible. His phone kept buzzing, kept lighting up with notifications. By 1 o'clock, the video had been viewed over 200,000 times. News outlets were picking it up, embedding it in articles with headlines like "Millionaire's cruelty caught on camera" and "When asking for help gets you humiliated." At 2 o'clock, a van pulled up outside the shop with a satellite dish on top. A reporter and cameraman climbed out, heading straight for the entrance. Rylan intercepted them at the door. "Mr. Rylan, I'm Patricia Gomez from Channel 7. We'd love to get your statement about what happened with Cassian Sterling." "No comment," Rylan said firmly. "Just a few minutes of your time." "People want to hear your side." I said no comment. "Please leave." The reporter looked frustrated but handed him a business card anyway. "If you change your mind, call me. This story is only getting bigger." She was right. By 3 o'clock, the video had crossed 1 million views. By 4, it was trending on multiple platforms. Rylan's phone was useless now, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of calls and messages. He turned it off completely and tried to lose himself in work, but his hands shook as he held his tools. When it was time to pick up Penny, he walked to the school with his head down, aware of people looking at him differently. Some nodded with sympathy. Others whispered to each other as he passed. One woman stopped him on the sidewalk. "I saw what happened to you. I'm so sorry. That man is a monster." "Thank you," Rylan managed, then hurried on. Penny came running out of school with her usual energy, chattering about a project they were doing in science class. She didn't know yet. The world was exploding around them, but in her 8-year-old universe, everything was still normal. Mrs. Pat was waiting at the apartment when they returned. Her face creased with concern. "Rylan, dear, I've been trying to call you all afternoon. I saw the video. Everyone's seen it. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Butt. The whole neighborhood is talking about it. People are angry, not at you, at him. At that Sterling man." She lowered her voice, glancing at Penny, who was in her room changing clothes. "Was it really as bad as it looked?" "It was exactly as bad as it looked." She squeezed his hand. "You held yourself together beautifully. Not many men could have walked away with that kind of dignity." After she left, Rylan made dinner while Penny did homework at the kitchen table. He tried to act normal, tried to be present for her, but his mind kept drifting to the video, to the millions of people who'd now witnessed his humiliation, to whatever consequences were rippling outward through the world. At 7 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Rylan opened it to find Deirdre Chang, the attorney who'd stopped by his shop the previous week. She wasn't smiling. "May I come in?" He let her inside, and she glanced around the small apartment before turning to him with a serious expression. "I need you to be honest with me. Did you know that video was going to be released?" Rylan's throat tightened. "Yes." "Did you authorize it?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Someone sent it to me, offered to post it." I said yes. Deirdre closed her eyes briefly, as if processing difficult information. "Rylan, I came by your shop last week because I work for a legal aid organization. We help small business owners navigate financial difficulties. I was planning to offer you free legal assistance with restructuring your debts." "I don't understand. That video has been viewed 3 million times in the last 7 hours. Cassian Sterling is powerful, wealthy, and vindictive. Do you understand what you've just done? You've declared war on a man who has the resources to destroy you." The words landed like punches. I wasn't trying to start a war. I just wanted people to know the truth. The truth is now public. But truth doesn't protect you from lawsuits, from legal harassment, from a man with unlimited money and a bruised ego. She pulled a folder from her briefcase and set it on his kitchen table. Sterling's attorneys are already preparing their response. They're going to claim the video was edited, taken out of context, that you provoked him somehow. They're going to paint you as an opportunist trying to extort money through public sympathy. But that's not. None of that is true. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what they can make a jury believe. Deirdre's expression softened slightly. But here's the thing. I don't think they'll win. That video is damning. The audio is clear. There's no context that makes throwing water in someone's face acceptable. But they'll try, and the process will be expensive and exhausting. Ryland sank into a chair, the weight of what he'd set in motion finally hitting him fully. What do I do? First, you don't talk to media without consulting me. Second, you document everything, every threat, every contact from Sterling or his people. Third, she paused, studying him carefully. Third, you prepare yourself. Public opinion is on your side right now, but that can shift. Sterling will launch a PR campaign. He'll donate to charities, appear on talk shows, tell his version of events. You need to stay steady, stay dignified, and trust that the truth will hold. Will it? Hold, I mean. I think so. But Rylan, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Are you ready for that? He thought about Penny in the next room, about the shop downstairs, about the life he'd built from the ruins of loss. He thought about his father's tool belt and Allison's anniversary shirt and every moment that had led him here. I don't know if I'm ready, but I'm not backing down. Deirdre nodded slowly. Good, because backing down now would be worse than never starting. You've made your stand. Now you have to see it through. She handed him her card. Call me if anything happens, anything at all. And Rylan, get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be even bigger than today. After she left, Rylan stood at his window, looking down at the street below. People were walking past his shop, some of them pausing to look up at the building, pointing. His phone, still turned off, sat on the counter like an unexploded bomb. He'd wanted accountability. He'd wanted justice. Now he was about to find out what those things actually cost. By Wednesday morning, the video had been viewed over 10 million times. Rylan woke to find news vans parked outside his shop, reporters camped on the sidewalk, waiting for a statement he had no intention of giving. He had to use the back entrance to get Penny out to school, cutting through the alley to avoid the cameras. Dad, why are all those people here? Penny asked, her small hand gripping his tightly. They're interested in something that happened at work. Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart, but she was worrying. He could see it in her eyes, in the way she kept looking back over her shoulder as they walked. At school, other parents stared at them. Some offered supportive smiles. Others whispered. One mother approached him directly. My husband and I saw what that man did to you. We think you're incredibly brave for speaking out. Thank you, Rylan said, though he didn't feel brave. He felt exposed, vulnerable, like he'd stripped naked in front of the entire world. Back at the shop, Jordan had already turned away 3 reporters. They keep asking for interviews. One guy offered me $500 if I'd convince you to talk to them. Don't take their money. We're not talking to anyone. The morning brought more complications. A process server arrived at 11 with legal documents. Cassian Sterling was suing him for defamation, claiming the video had been manipulated and released without consent, causing irreparable harm to his reputation and business interests. The lawsuit sought $5 million in damages. Rylan called Deirdre immediately. I was expecting this, she said calmly. Don't panic. This is an intimidation tactic. Sterling's trying to scare you into retracting everything and disappearing. We'll file a response and we'll win. That video speaks for itself. $5 million, Deirdre. If he wins, he won't win, trust me. But I need you to stay strong and not engage with him or his people in any way. Everything goes through me now. After hanging up, Rylan tried to focus on work, but the day felt like it was happening to someone else. A customer came in for an oil change and spent 20 minutes telling Rylan how inspiring he was. Another customer cancelled their appointment, saying they didn't want to get involved in all this drama. By afternoon, a crowd had gathered outside, not reporters, but regular people holding signs. "We stand with Rylan. Millionaires don't own morality. Justice for working families." It was surreal. These strangers had turned his private humiliation into a cause, a movement. Jordan stood at the window watching them with wide eyes. "Boss, this is crazy. You're like famous now. I don't want to be famous. I just want to fix cars and raise my daughter." But want didn't matter anymore. The story had taken on a life of its own, spinning beyond his control. By evening, the justice for Rylan was trending nationally. Opinion pieces appeared in major newspapers. Cable news segments debated whether wealthy people had a moral obligation to help those in need. Cassie and Sterling's business partners began distancing themselves, releasing statements about reviewing their associations. That night, after Penny was asleep, Rylan sat on his couch scrolling through his phone, which he'd finally turned back on. The messages were overwhelming. Hundreds from strangers offering support, dozens from journalists requesting interviews, and one from an unknown number that made his blood run cold. "You've made a terrible mistake. This ends badly for you." He showed it to Deirdre the next morning. She photographed it, added it to their file, and told him to report any more threats immediately. "Sterling's getting desperate." That's actually a good sign. It means he knows public opinion has turned against him. Doesn't feel like a good sign. "Feels like I've put my daughter in danger. Has anyone approached Penny? Tried to contact her at school?" "No, nothing like that." "Good. I've already contacted the school and explained the situation. They're keeping an eye out. Security has been quietly increased." The thought of Penny needing security because of his decision made Rylan's stomach turn. But Deirdre was right. There was no going back now. He'd started this, and he had to see it through. Thursday brought unexpected developments. Someone had created a crowdfunding campaign for Rylan's shop without his permission or knowledge. By the time he discovered it, the campaign had raised $60,000. $60,000. More than enough for the lift, for all his debts, for a cushion that would let him breathe for the first time in 3 years. But accepting it felt wrong, like profiting from humiliation, like proving Sterling's attorneys right about his motivations. "Take the money," Deirdre advised. "People want to help, let them. That's not exploitation, that's community support. I don't even know who started it." "Does it matter? The money is real. The support is real. Use it to stabilize your business and protect your daughter's future." Mrs. Butt agreed when he asked her opinion that evening. "Your pride is admirable, Rylan, but it won't pay the bills or fix your lift. These people are offering help freely. Honor their generosity by accepting it." Friday afternoon, Sterling's public relations campaign launched. He appeared on a local talk show, perfectly groomed and composed, spinning a narrative about being ambushed by a con artist who'd manipulated him into a meeting under false pretenses. He claimed Rylan had been aggressive and threatening, that the water throwing had been a defensive reaction, that the video had been edited to remove crucial context. "I'm the victim here," Sterling said with practiced sincerity. "My reputation, built over decades of hard work and philanthropy, is being destroyed by lies and manipulation. I've helped countless people in this community. This man came to my home looking for a handout, and when I explained that I couldn't enable his poor business practices, he became hostile. I had to protect myself and my fiancée." The lies were breathtaking in their audacity. Rylan watched the interview with Jordan, both of them stunned into silence. None of that is what happened," Jordan finally said. "I know. Are people going to believe him?" "Some will. People always believe what they want to believe." But the response on social media suggested most people weren't buying Sterling's version. Comments flooded in, pointing out the inconsistencies in his story. The fact that the video showed no aggression from Rylan, the implausibility of his claims. Several people who'd had negative experiences with Sterling began sharing their own stories, creating a flood of testimony about his arrogance and cruelty. By Saturday, Sterling's approval ratings had plummeted. 3 major business partners announced they were severing ties. 2 charity boards asked him to step down. His development company's stock dropped 12%. Ryland should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt exhausted and hollow. This wasn't justice. It was a feeding frenzy, a public execution driven by social media outrage and mob mentality. Sterling deserved consequences for his actions, but this felt disproportionate, dangerous. Saturday evening, Deirdre called with news. Sterling's attorneys have reached out. They want to settle. Settle what? He's the one suing me. They want to drop the lawsuit in exchange for you making a public statement saying the video was posted without your permission and you don't condone the harassment Sterling has received. They're also offering $50,000 for your silence going forward, so they want me to lie and take hush money. Essentially, yes. Ryland didn't even have to think about it. No, absolutely not. I told them you'd say that. But Ryland, their next move will be aggressive. If settlement fails, they'll come after you hard. Character assassination, digging into your past, trying to find anything they can use against you. Let them look. I've got nothing to hide. Everyone has something they don't want public. Everyone. The warning hung in the air between them. Ryland thought about his life, the medical bills, the struggles, the times he'd fallen short as a father, despite his best efforts. What would they find? What would they twist? I'm not lying for him, Deirdre. The video shows the truth. That's all that matters. After he hung up, Ryland walked down to the shop and stood in the silence, surrounded by tools and equipment and the smell of honest work. The crowdfunding campaign had reached $85,000. The new hydraulic lift could be delivered by Wednesday. His debts could be paid off. Penny's future could be secured. But at what cost? He touched his father's tool belt hanging on the wall, feeling the worn leather beneath his fingers. 3 generations of integrity, of doing the right thing even when it was hard. I hope I'm making you proud, Dad, he whispered to the empty shop. I hope this is what you would have done. The tool belt offered no answers, but somehow its presence was enough. Ryland turned off the lights and headed upstairs, where Penny was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm raging around them, trusting that her father would keep her safe. He would. No matter what came next, he would protect her, even if it meant facing down a millionaire with unlimited resources and unlimited rage. The battle was only beginning. Sunday. Morning brought a knock at Ryland's door that changed everything. He was making breakfast, Penny still asleep, when someone rapped softly but insistently. Through the peephole, he saw a woman he didn't recognize. Mid-30s, professional dress, nervous expression. He opened the door with the chain still attached. Can I help you? Mr. Ryland, my name is Vanessa Ortiz. I was Cassian Sterling's executive assistant. I'm the one who sent you the video. The world seemed to tilt. Ryland stared at her through the gap in the door, his mind racing. The polished woman who'd greeted him at Sterling's mansion that night, who'd brought him water before it became a weapon. She was the anonymous sender. Why are you here? Because there's more you need to know. More than what was in that video. May I come in, please? I promise I'm not here to hurt you. Against his better judgment, Ryland unlatched the chain and let her inside. She glanced around the small apartment, her expression unreadable, then turned to face him with something that looked like shame in her eyes. I've worked for Cassian Sterling for 4 years. I've seen him treat people terribly before. Employees, contractors, service workers, but what he did to you was the final straw. I couldn't stay silent anymore, and why didn't you just quit? Because quitting wouldn't have stopped him. He'd just keep doing it, keep hurting people, keep believing his money makes him untouchable. She pulled a tablet from her bag. But I didn't come here just to confess. I came to show you something that will change this entire situation. She opened the tablet and pulled up a series of documents, spreadsheets, emails, financial records. For the past 2 years, Cassian Sterling has been running a massive fraud scheme. He's been inflating property values on his developments, bribing building inspectors, falsifying loan applications. He's defrauded investors out of millions of dollars. Ryland stared at the documents, not fully comprehending. Why are you telling me this? Because his attorneys are planning to destroy you. They're going to dig up everything they can about your past, twist it, and use it to discredit you and the video. They're going to paint you as a con artist, a deadbeat, someone who preys on wealthy people's sympathy. And they're going to win, Rylan, because they have unlimited resources and you don't. So what am I supposed to do with this information? You're supposed to give it to the authorities. The FBI has been investigating Sterling for 6 months, but they don't have enough evidence yet to move forward. These documents would change that. They'd give the FBI everything they need to arrest him. The weight of what she was suggesting settled over Rylan like a physical force. You want me to turn this over? Why not do it yourself? Because I'm implicated. I helped him do some of these things, not knowing at first what they were, but later I knew and I kept quiet because I was afraid. If I come forward, I go to prison too. But you're a victim. You have no connection to his business dealings. You can hand this over as a concerned citizen who received information anonymously. That's a lie. It's protection. For both of us. Vanessa's hands trembled slightly as she held the tablet. I know it's asking a lot. I know you didn't sign up for any of this. But Cassian Sterling is a criminal, and he's using his wealth to crush you, just like he's crushed dozens of other people. This is how you stop him. Not with public outrage, but with the law. Rylan's mind spun. The video had been one thing, exposing cruelty, seeking accountability. But this was something else entirely. This was evidence of serious crimes. This would send Sterling to prison. How do I know these documents are real? I have originals in a safety deposit box. I have witness testimony from other employees who were involved. I have audio recordings. This is real, Rylan, all of it. Why didn't you just send this to the FBI yourself? Anonymously? Because they'd trace it back to me eventually. The digital footprints, the access logs, I'd be found out. But if you receive it from an anonymous source and turn it over as a good citizen, they'll investigate the claims on their own merits. And once they start digging, they'll find everything. Rylan walked to the window, looking down at the street where a few reporters still lingered. His life had been turned inside out by that video. His daughter's sense of security had been shaken. His privacy had been destroyed. And now this woman was asking him to take an even bigger step to become a witness in a federal fraud investigation. What happens to me if I do this? You'll be questioned by the FBI. They'll verify you received the information anonymously. You might have to testify eventually, but your role would be minimal. You're just the messenger. And Rylan, Vanessa's voice grew urgent. Once this information comes out, Sterling's lawsuit against you evaporates. He'll be too busy defending himself against criminal charges to worry about defamation. You'll be free. Free, the word sounded impossible. But Vanessa was right. As long as Sterling had resources, he'd keep coming after Rylan, keep trying to destroy him. The lawsuit was just the beginning. There would be private investigators, character assassination, endless legal harassment. Unless Sterling was stopped completely, I need to think about this. You have 24 hours. After that, I'm destroying everything. I can't risk holding on to it any longer. Vanessa transferred the files to a USB drive and held it out to him. Everything is on here. Look at it. See for yourself. Then decide if you want to be part of stopping a criminal or if you want to just survive his attacks for the next few years. Rylan took the drive, feeling its weight in his palm. Such a small object to contain so much destruction. If I do this, you stay anonymous. You don't face consequences. That's the plan. Though I'll have to live with what I did, knowing I helped him for so long. That's my burden to carry. After Vanessa left, Rylan stood in his kitchen holding the USB drive, his hands shaking. He could hear Penny stirring in her room, starting to wake up. In a few minutes, she'd come out for breakfast, and he'd have to smile and be her father, steady and strong and uncomplicated. But inside, he was drowning in impossible choices. He called Deirdre. She arrived within the hour, and he showed her everything on the drive. She sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through documents, her expression growing darker with each page. This is, Rylan, this is massive. If even half of this is true, Sterling is looking at 20 years in federal prison. Is it real? Can you tell? I'd need forensic accountants to verify everything, but the structure looks legitimate. These are internal company documents, emails with timestamps and metadata, financial records that match public filings. Someone with deep access compiled this. The woman who gave it to me, she said the FBI is already investigating him. Deirdre pulled out her phone and made a call. Let me check something. She spoke quietly to someone for several minutes, then hung up. I have a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office. There is an ongoing investigation into Sterling Industries, but it's stalled for lack of evidence. This, she gestured at the laptop, this would break it wide open. What do I do? You turn it over, today, this afternoon. We contact the FBI, explain you received this anonymously, and let them take it from there. And I become part of a federal case. My name gets dragged through this even more. Rylan, your name is already being dragged through this. Sterling made sure of that when he sued you. This is your chance to shift the narrative entirely, from you being a troublemaker to you being a whistleblower who helped expose a criminal. He thought about Penny in the next room, about the shop downstairs, about the quiet life he'd wanted to rebuild after Allison died. None of this was what he'd signed up for. All he'd wanted was help fixing a hydraulic lift. What if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm involved somehow? You're not involved. You're a victim who received information and did the right thing by turning it over. That's the story, and it's true, but was it? Rylan had made choices every step of the way, agreeing to release the video, accepting the crowdfunding money, refusing the settlement. He'd stopped being a passive victim the moment he typed yes to that anonymous email. Now he had to choose again. Let Sterling wage war against him with unlimited resources, or give the FBI the ammunition to take Sterling down completely. If I do this, Rylan said slowly, there's no going back. Sterling will know someone inside his organization betrayed him. He'll go after everyone. He's going to do that anyway. This just ensures he does it from a jail cell instead of a mansion. Rylan looked at the USB drive sitting on his table. Such a small thing to hold so much power. The power to destroy a millionaire. The power to protect his daughter. The power to finally truly hold someone accountable for their cruelty. Call your FBI contact, he said. Let's do this right. Deirdre nodded and began making arrangements. Within 2 hours, FBI agents would arrive at his apartment to take possession of the evidence. Within days, they'd begin building their case. Within weeks, Cassian Sterling's world would collapse entirely. Ryland had walked into Sterling's mansion, asking for $8,000. He was about to hand over documents worth millions in prosecutions. Sometimes justice came in unexpected forms. Sometimes the powerless found power in simply telling the truth. The FBI agents arrived at 3 o'clock that Sunday afternoon, 2 men in dark suits who introduced themselves as Special Agents Park and Bellamy. They were professional, calm, and thorough. Rylan had sent Penny to Mrs. Batt's apartment for the afternoon. Not wanting her to witness any of this, Agent Park took possession of the USB drive while Agent Bellamy asked questions, recording everything on a digital device. How had Rylan received the information? When had he examined it? Had he shared it with anyone besides his attorney? Rylan answered honestly, explaining that it had come from an anonymous source who wanted Sterling held accountable. He didn't mention Vanessa by name. That wasn't his story to tell. The agents exchanged glances but didn't press for details they seemed to know he didn't have. Mr. Rylan, Agent Park said after 90 minutes of questioning, you understand this makes you a witness in a federal investigation. You may be called to testify about how you received this evidence. I understand. You should also know that once we move forward with this, Cassian Sterling and his attorneys will know the evidence came from you. They'll claim you stole it, that you're part of some conspiracy against him. It's going to get ugly. It's already ugly, Ryland said quietly. Agent Bellamy nodded. That video of what he did to you, we saw it. What you did, coming forward with this evidence despite everything you're already dealing with. That takes real courage. After they left, Deirdre stayed behind, helping Rylan understand what would happen next. The FBI would spend several days verifying the documents, cross-referencing them with their existing investigation, building their case. Then if everything checked out, they'd seek arrest warrants. It could happen within a week, or it could take months. Federal investigations moved slowly but thoroughly. "Are you okay?" Deirdre asked as she gathered her things to leave. "I don't know. I keep thinking about that night at his house, how small he made me feel. And now I'm the one who handed over evidence that might send him to prison. It feels powerful and terrifying. That's because you're a good man. Power terrifies good people and intoxicates bad ones." She squeezed his shoulder. "You did the right thing. Now we wait." Monday morning, Ryland tried to return to some semblance of normal life. The new hydraulic lift was being installed, paid for with the crowdfunding money, which had now exceeded $100,000. Workers from the equipment company filled the shop with noise and activity, transforming the broken lift into something functional again. Jordan watched the installation with barely contained excitement. "Boss, we can actually take jobs again. Real jobs, not just oil changes and brake pads." "Yeah," Ryland said. But his mind was elsewhere, wondering when the FBI would move. What Sterling would do when he realized the walls were closing in. The call came Tuesday afternoon. Deirdre's voice was tight with controlled urgency. The FBI executed search warrants at Sterling Industries this morning. They seized computers, financial records, everything. "It's happening, Ryland. The news broke 20 minutes ago." Ryland turned on the television in his office. Every local channel was covering it. Federal agents walking out of Sterling's corporate headquarters, carrying boxes of evidence. Reporters speculating about what it meant. Legal analysts discussing the implications. Sterling himself was nowhere to be seen, but his attorneys had already released a statement calling it a politically motivated witch hunt. By evening, the connection between the FBI raid and Ryland's case had been made. News outlets were reporting that the investigation had accelerated. After an anonymous tip was received by a local business owner who'd had negative interactions with Sterling. They didn't use Ryland's name, but everyone knew who they meant. His phone exploded again with calls and messages. Reporters wanted statements. Supporters wanted to congratulate him. And buried among them was a message from an unknown number. "You're a dead man." Ryland showed it to Deirdre, who immediately contacted the FBI. Within an hour, 2 police officers were stationed outside his building, and Agent Park called to assure him they were taking the threat seriously. "Sterling's desperate," Park said. "Desperate people make stupid mistakes. We've got eyes on him, and we've got protection on you. Just stay vigilant." Wednesday brought the news Ryland had been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. Cassian Sterling had been arrested. The footage played on every channel. Sterling in handcuffs being led from his mansion, photographers shouting questions, his attorney making statements about his client's innocence. His fiancée Talia was visible in the background, her face pale with shock. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, bank fraud, falsifying documents, conspiracy. If convicted on all counts, Sterling faced 30 years in federal prison. His bail was set at $5 million, which he posted within hours. But his passport was confiscated, and he was confined to house arrest with electronic monitoring. Ryland watched it all from his apartment, Penny beside him doing homework, oblivious to the magnitude of what was unfolding. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and the nagging question of whether he'd done the right thing. That evening, Mrs. Bat brought dinner, homemade curry and rice, enough for days. She sat with him at the kitchen table after Penny went to bed, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "You look troubled, Ryland. I helped put a man in jail. Or I will have if he's convicted. You helped hold a criminal accountable. That's different, is it? What if I did this for revenge? What if it wasn't about justice at all, just about hurting him back?" Mrs. Bat was quiet for a moment, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "Why do you think those have to be different things?" "You were wronged. You wanted him to face consequences. That's both justice and revenge, and there's nothing wrong with that. The question is whether the consequences fit the crime." He threw water in my face. "Now he might spend 30 years in prison. He committed fraud for years. He stole from investors. He bribed officials. He hurt countless people with his greed and arrogance. The water in your face was just the moment that made him visible. You didn't create his crimes, Rylan. You just brought them into the light. Her words settled something in his chest, some knot of guilt he'd been carrying. She was right. Sterling's downfall wasn't Rylan's fault. It was Sterling's own doing, the natural consequence of years of criminal behavior. Thursday morning brought an unexpected visitor, Talia, Sterling's fiancée. She arrived without fanfare, knocking softly on his door, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. She looked smaller than she had that night in the mansion, diminished somehow. "I know you have no reason to talk to me," she said when Rylan answered the door, "but I wanted to apologize. What I did that night, laughing at you, participating in that cruelty, it was inexcusable. I've thought about it every day since." Rylan studied her carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motive. He found only shame and weariness. "Why are you really here?" "Because I'm leaving him. I called off the engagement yesterday. And because I want you to know that I'm prepared to testify against him if the prosecutors need me. I've seen him do terrible things to people. I stayed because I was weak and comfortable and afraid. But I can't stay anymore. Does he know you're here?" "No, he thinks I'm at my sister's house. He doesn't know I've already spoken to the FBI." She pulled a small envelope from her purse and held it out. "This is for you, for your daughter. It's not much, but it's from my own money, not Cassian's." Rylan didn't take it. "I don't want your money." "Then donate it. Give it to charity. I need to do something to make this right, even though I know it never can be." She set the envelope on the doorframe. "What you did took courage. Real courage. And I'm sorry it cost you so much." After she left, Rylan opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $10,000 and a handwritten note for Penny's future. "I'm sorry." He stood there for a long time, holding the check, thinking about that night in the mansion. Talia's laughter had been genuine then, her contempt real. But people could change, could wake up to their own complicity. Maybe she was sincere. Maybe she wasn't. Either way, her apology didn't erase what had happened, but it added another layer of complexity to a situation that was already impossibly tangled. Friday brought the preliminary hearing. Rylan attended with Deirdre, sitting in the back of the courtroom as prosecutors outlined their case against Sterling. The evidence was overwhelming. The documents Vanessa had provided, combined with what the FBI had seized in their raid, painted a picture of systematic fraud spanning years. Sterling sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his face carefully neutral, but Rylan could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when particularly damning evidence was presented. Their eyes met once across the courtroom, and the hatred in Sterling's gaze was palpable. The judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. A date was set for 3 months out. Sterling's attorneys immediately requested the defamation lawsuit against Rylan be dismissed, given the criminal proceedings, and the judge agreed without prejudice, meaning Sterling could refile later, but for now, Rylan was free from that particular threat. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Deirdre had prepared a brief statement, and Rylan read it in a steady voice. "I'm grateful that the justice system is working as it should. I hope this case demonstrates that no one, regardless of wealth or status, is above the law. My focus now is on my daughter and my business, and I ask for privacy as we move forward." It was carefully worded, legally safe, and utterly inadequate to express the complexity of everything he felt. But it would have to do. That evening, Rylan stood in his shop, running his hand over the new hydraulic lift. It gleamed in the overhead lights, solid and functional, ready to hold the weight of vehicles and livelihoods. The crowdfunding campaign had closed at $137,000, enough to cover the lift, pay off his debts, and establish a real financial cushion for the first time in years. He thought about the journey from that night in Sterling's mansion to this moment. The humiliation, the video, the investigation, the arrest. Each step had felt impossible, terrifying, but he'd taken them anyway. His phone buzzed with a text from Agent Park. "Sterling's attorneys are trying to negotiate a plea deal. Thought you should know. A plea deal meant Sterling would admit guilt in exchange for reduced charges. It meant this would end without a trial, without months of testimony and media coverage. It meant Ryland could finally close this chapter and move forward. The plea negotiations collapsed after 10 days. Sterling refused to admit wrongdoing, refused to accept any deal that included prison time. His attorneys released statements about fighting the charges vigorously, about proving his innocence, about exposing the conspiracy against him. The trial date held, 3 months and counting. Ryland tried to focus on rebuilding. The shop was busier than it had been in years. Customers coming from across the county, many of them specifically because they'd heard his story and wanted to support him. Jordan worked full days now, and Ryland had hired a second apprentice. A quiet young woman named Iris, who had a gift for diagnostics. The money from the crowdfunding sat in a business account, carefully managed, providing the stability he'd dreamed of for years. Penny had new clothes, a new backpack, and a savings account for college. Mrs. Bat still brought dinner twice a week, though now it was more about companionship than necessity. Life should have felt better. In many ways it did, but Ryland couldn't shake the sense of waiting, of suspended resolution. Sterling was out there, under house arrest, but still dangerous, still hateful, still plotting ways to salvage his empire and destroy anyone who'd stood against him. 6 weeks after the arrest, Agent Park called with disturbing news. Sterling's been violating his house arrest terms. We've documented him making calls that violate the court order, conducting business he's prohibited from engaging in. We're moving to revoke his bail. What does that mean? It means he goes to jail to await trial. No more mansion, no more control over his assets. He'll be in a cell like any other defendant. The hearing for bail revocation was scheduled for the following Monday. Deirdre told Ryland he didn't need to attend, but he felt compelled to be there, to see this through personally. He'd started this journey sitting across from Sterling in that mansion. He needed to see where it led. The courtroom was packed when he arrived. Journalists, legal observers, Sterling's business associates, and a surprising number of ordinary people who'd followed the case and wanted to witness justice firsthand. Ryland sat in the back row beside Deirdre, trying to be invisible. Sterling was brought in, wearing the same expensive suit from the preliminary hearing, but something had changed. His face looked haggard, his eyes hollow. House arrest had taken a toll. Or perhaps it was the weight of impending consequences finally sinking in. The prosecutor presented evidence of Sterling's violations, recorded phone calls in which he'd directed business operations, attempted to move assets offshore, contacted witnesses he was prohibited from approaching. The evidence was damning, methodically presented, impossible to dispute. Sterling's attorney argued that the violations were technical, unintentional, the result of misunderstanding rather than malice. But even he seemed to know it was a losing argument. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair and no-nonsense demeanor, listened to both sides before delivering her ruling. Mr. Sterling, you were granted bail with specific conditions. Those conditions exist to ensure the integrity of this proceeding and the safety of witnesses. You have flagrantly violated those conditions, demonstrating both a disregard for this court's authority and a belief that rules don't apply to you. Your bail is hereby revoked. You will be remanded to federal custody immediately to await trial. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. Sterling's face went pale. His attorney leaned in, speaking urgently, but Sterling wasn't listening. His eyes were scanning the courtroom, and they found Ryland sitting in the back. For a moment, their gazes locked. Ryland saw everything in that look: rage, hatred, disbelief, and something else. Fear, real, genuine fear. Cassian Sterling, who'd treated people like insects to be crushed, who'd thrown water in a desperate father's face and laughed, was afraid. Marshals approached to take Sterling into custody. As they secured handcuffs on his wrists, Sterling kept staring at Ryland, his lips moving silently. Ryland didn't need to hear the words to know what they were: curses, threats, promises of vengeance, but they were empty now. Sterling was being led away to a cell, stripped of his power, reduced to just another defendant in an orange jumpsuit. His empire was crumbling. His reputation was destroyed. His freedom was gone. As the marshals guided Sterling toward the side door that led to the holding cells, something unexpected happened. Sterling's legs seemed to give out. He stumbled, and the marshals caught him, holding him upright. For just a moment, the mask of arrogant confidence slipped completely, and Rylan saw not a powerful millionaire, but a broken man facing the consequences of his own actions. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Sterling was helped through the door, and it closed behind him. Deirdre touched Rylan's arm. "Are you all right?" "I don't know. I don't know what I thought I'd feel. Relief? Vindication? Maybe. Instead, I just feel sad. For everyone involved. For what all of this cost." They left the courthouse through a side entrance, avoiding the journalists gathered out front. The afternoon sun was bright, almost harsh, after the dim courtroom. Rylan stood on the steps for a moment, letting it warm his face, feeling the weight of the past 2 months settling into something he could finally carry. His phone buzzed. A text from Jordan. "Mrs. Garrett's Camry is making that noise again. Want me to take a look or wait for you?" Normal, ordinary. The simple questions of daily work and life continuing. Rylan smiled slightly and tied back. "Go ahead and check it." "I'll be there in 30 minutes. He started walking toward where he'd parked his truck, Deirdre beside him. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we wait for trial. Sterling's attorneys will probably push for a plea deal again, now that he's in custody. Most defendants don't want to go through trial from a jail cell, and if he doesn't deal, then you might be called to testify. About the video, about how you received the evidence, about his character. Are you ready for that?" Rylan thought about it, standing in a courtroom, facing Sterling again, telling the truth about that night under oath. "If I have to be, I will be. That's all any of us can do. Be ready when the moment comes." They reached his truck, and Deirdre gave him a professional handshake that somehow conveyed more than words could. "You did good, Rylan. Your father would be proud." After she left, Rylan sat in his truck for a few minutes before starting the engine. He thought about Sterling in a cell tonight, about the mansion standing empty, about Talia somewhere trying to rebuild her life. He thought about Vanessa, still hidden, still carrying her own burden of guilt and choices. Most of all, he thought about Penny waiting for him at home, ready to tell him about her day at school, completely unaware that her father had just witnessed the most powerful man who'd ever wronged him being led away in handcuffs. He started the truck and headed back to the shop. Back to work, back to the life he'd been fighting so hard to protect. The storm wasn't over. The trial still loomed. But for the first time since that awful night in Sterling's mansion, Rylan felt like he could breathe fully. Like the weight pressing down on his chest had lightened just enough to let hope back in. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in late November, 3 months after Sterling's arrest. Rylan had been subpoenaed as a witness, though the prosecutors assured him his testimony would be brief, mainly to authenticate the video and explain how he'd received the financial documents. He sat in the witness waiting room, wearing the same blue Oxford shirt he'd worn to Sterling's mansion, now cleaned and pressed. It felt right somehow, closing this circle wearing the same shirt that had been drenched in humiliation that night. Deirdre sat beside him, reviewing notes, preparing him for the defense's cross-examination. "They're going to try to paint you as an opportunist, someone who saw a chance to profit from public sympathy. Just tell the truth and stay calm. I've been telling the truth from the beginning. I know. That's why we're going to win." When his name was called, Rylan walked into the courtroom with his heart pounding. The jury sat in their box, 12 ordinary people who would decide Sterling's fate. The judge presided from her bench. And there, at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, sat Cassian Sterling. Their eyes met as Rylan walked to the witness stand. Sterling looked thinner, older, diminished by months in custody. But the hatred in his eyes remained sharp and focused. Rylan was sworn in, his hand on the Bible, his voice steady as he promised to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 40s named Catherine Voss, approached with a tablet. "Mr. Rylan, I'm going to show you a video. Can you tell the jury if you recognize it?" The video played on screens throughout the courtroom. There was Rylan sitting at that marble table. There was Sterling reaching for the water glass. There was the throw, the laughter, the moment that had changed everything. Watching it again in front of all these people, Rylan felt the shame try to resurface. But it couldn't find purchase anymore. Too much had happened. Too much had changed. Yes, I recognize it. That's me and Mr. Sterling at his home. Can you describe what happened that evening? Rylan took a breath and told the story. The broken lift, the desperate email, the dinner invitation, the pitch for help, and finally, the cruelty. He spoke calmly, without embellishment, letting the facts speak for themselves. How did you feel when Mr. Sterling threw water in your face? Humiliated, powerless, like I wasn't worth basic human decency. Did you provoke this response in any way? No, I asked for help. That's all. Sterling's attorney stood for cross-examination, a silver-haired man named Preston who specialized in defending wealthy clients. He approached with calculated sympathy. "Mr. Rylan, you've profited significantly from this incident, haven't you? A crowdfunding campaign raised over $100,000. People chose to donate. I didn't ask for it, but you accepted it. And that broken lift you mentioned, it's fixed now, isn't it? Paid for with that money?" "Yes. So in a way, my client's actions, unfortunate as they may have been, actually benefited you financially." Rylan felt anger spark in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "My wife died 3 years ago from cancer. I've been drowning in debt ever since. If you think getting water thrown in my face was worth fixing a hydraulic lift, you're welcome to trade places." Several jurors nodded. Preston's expression tightened. "Let's talk about these financial documents you provided to the FBI. Where did you get them?" "They were sent to me anonymously." "How convenient. And you had no role in obtaining them from my client's company?" "None. I run an auto repair shop. I wouldn't know how to hack into anything or steal documents. Yet you chose to give them to authorities rather than returning them to their rightful owner." "The rightful owner was defrauding investors. I gave them to the people who could stop that." Preston tried several more angles, but Rylan remained consistent, honest, unshakable. After 40 minutes, the attorney gave up and dismissed him. As Rylan stepped down from the witness stand, he walked past Sterling's table. Sterling leaned forward, whispering just loud enough for Rylan to hear. "You'll regret this." Rylan paused, turned, and looked Sterling directly in the eye. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear enough for the nearby jury members to hear. "No, I won't. But I hope someday you regret what you did to me and everyone else you've hurt." A marshal intervened before Sterling could respond, and Rylan continued out of the courtroom. In the hallway, his hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding his system. But he'd done it. He'd faced Sterling down, told his truth, and walked away with his dignity intact. The trial continued for 2 more weeks. Other witnesses testified. Forensic accountants explaining the fraud schemes, investors who'd been cheated, employees who'd been threatened into silence. Vanessa never appeared. Her identity remained protected, her information validated through other means. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Sterling showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. Guilty after guilty after guilty, 18 counts in total. But when the judge scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks out, his shoulders finally sagged, the weight of inevitable consequences pressing down. Outside the courthouse, Rylan stood with Deirdre among a crowd of supporters and journalists. Someone asked how he felt. "I feel like justice was served," he said simply. "Not just for me, but for everyone Mr. Sterling hurt. I hope he uses his time in prison to reflect on the kind of man he became and the people he damaged along the way." It was more grace than Sterling deserved, but Rylan meant it. He wasn't interested in vengeance anymore. He'd watched a powerful man fall, and there was no joy in it, just a quiet satisfaction that the system had worked, that truth had mattered, that ordinary people could still hold the powerful accountable. He drove home to Penny, who was waiting with Mrs. Bat, ready to tell him about a story she'd written in school. Ready for dinner and homework and the normal rhythms of their life together, the nightmare was ending. Tomorrow, they could start to truly move forward. 6 months after the verdict, Ryland stood in his shop on a Saturday morning. Watching sunlight stream through the windows, he'd finally had time to clean properly. The place had transformed. New equipment hummed quietly, fresh paint covered the walls, and a small waiting area with coffee and magazines made customers feel welcome instead of tolerated. Jordan was training Iris on a transmission rebuild. Their heads bent together over the engine block, speaking the language of mechanics that Ryland's father had taught him decades ago. A third employee, an experienced technician named Warren, worked in the second bay on a full restoration project, the kind of work Ryland had only dreamed of taking on before. The business was thriving. Word had spread not just about the Sterling case, but about the quality of work, the fair prices, the honest service. Ryland had hired a part-time bookkeeper to manage the finances properly, ensuring he'd never again be one broken lift away from disaster. But the success, welcome as it was, wasn't what made him pause that morning. It was the quiet sense of peace that had finally settled into his bones. Cassian Sterling had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. With good behavior, he might serve 12. His assets had been seized to pay restitution to his victims. The mansion had been sold. Sterling Industries had declared bankruptcy. Everything he'd built through fraud and cruelty had crumbled to dust. Ryland had attended the sentencing, sitting in the back of the courtroom one final time. Sterling had been given a chance to address the court, and for the first time, he'd shown something resembling remorse, though whether it was genuine or calculated for the judge's benefit, Ryland couldn't say. "I let success corrupt me," Sterling had said, his voice hollow. "I forgot that other people's struggles were real, that kindness matters more than power. I have no excuses for what I did. The judge hadn't been moved. You had every advantage, Mr. Sterling, and you used those advantages to hurt people who had none. The law must send a clear message that wealth does not place anyone above accountability." 15 years. Ryland had felt no triumph hearing the sentence, only a deep weariness and the hope that Sterling might actually use that time to become someone different, someone better. Talia had left town, Deirdre told him later. She'd started over somewhere on the West Coast, working in a non-profit helping domestic violence survivors. Vanessa remained anonymous, her role in Sterling's downfall a secret she'd carry forever, but the documents she'd provided had been the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Now, standing in his shop, Ryland pulled out his phone and scrolled to a photo from last week. Penny, grinning widely, holding up a certificate for making the honor roll. She was thriving, more confident, more secure, sensing that their lives had stabilized in ways she was too young to fully understand. Mrs. Bat still brought dinner twice a week, though now they took turns cooking for each other. She'd become family in the way that neighbors sometimes do, filling gaps neither of them had known existed. The bell above the shop door chimed. Ryland looked up to see a young man in his 20s, nervous energy radiating from him, clutching a folder against his chest. "Can I help you?" "Are you Ryland?" "The one from the news." Ryland tensed slightly. Even now, recognition could be complicated. "I am. I'm starting a small business. A food truck. And I've been trying to get a loan. But the banks keep saying no because I don't have enough credit history. And I saw what happened to you, how people helped. And the young man's voice cracked slightly. "I don't know what I'm asking for. Maybe just advice? How do you keep going when everything feels impossible?" Ryland set down his wrench and walked over, really looking at this stranger who'd come to him for wisdom he wasn't sure he possessed. "What's your name?" "Felix." "Felix, come sit down." Ryland gestured to the waiting area, and they sat in the chairs his customers used. "The truth is, I don't have magic answers. When things got impossible for me, I just kept showing up. I took care of my daughter. I did the work in front of me. And when I had to ask for help, even though it terrified me, I asked. But look what happened when you asked. That guy threw water in my face, yes. But that wasn't the end of the story. The end of the story is that I'm still here. My business is stronger than it's ever been. My daughter is happy. And a man who thought he could treat people like garbage learned he was wrong. Rylan paused, choosing his next words carefully. The thing is, Felix, asking for help isn't weakness, it's courage. And sometimes the help comes in unexpected ways. He pulled out Deirdre's business card and handed it to the young man. Call this attorney. She works with a legal aid organization that helps small business owners. She might be able to point you toward resources the banks won't tell you about. Felix took the card with trembling hands. Thank you, really. I thank you. After he left, Rylan returned to work, but the encounter stayed with him. How many people were out there, struggling and scared, afraid to ask for help because they'd seen what could happen? How many would give up rather than risk humiliation? That evening, after closing the shop, Rylan climbed the stairs to his apartment, where Penny was already home from her friend's house, setting the table for dinner. The simplicity of the moment, just the two of them together safe, felt like the greatest victory of all. Dad, Penny said as they sat down to eat, my teacher said we should do a project about someone we admire. Can I do mine about you? The question caught him off guard. Why would you want to do that? Because you never gave up. Even when things were really hard. You kept taking care of me and working and being brave. Rylan felt his throat tighten. He reached across the table and took her small hand in his. I think you should pick someone more impressive than your old dad. There's nobody more impressive than you. Later, after Penny was asleep, Rylan stood at his window looking out at the street below. Somewhere across town, the mansion where he'd been humiliated stood empty, a monument to fallen pride. Somewhere in a federal prison, Cassian Sterling was learning to live without power or privilege. And here, in this small apartment above a 3-generation repair shop, a father and daughter were building a life defined not by what had been taken from them, but by what they'd fought to keep. The journey from that awful night to this quiet evening had cost him, in stress, in privacy, in the innocence of believing the world was fundamentally fair. But it had also taught him something essential, that dignity wasn't something others could take from you unless you surrendered it. That standing up to power required nothing more than truth and persistence. That sometimes the smallest acts of courage could topple empires built on cruelty. He thought about his father's tool belt hanging downstairs, about Allison's photograph on his nightstand, about all the people who'd helped him survive when survival seemed impossible. And he thought about Felix, the young man with the food truck dream, carrying Deirdre's card in his pocket, maybe finding hope in the story of how one struggling father had asked for help and changed everything. The story wasn't really about revenge or even justice, Rylan realized. It was about something simpler and more profound, the unshakable truth that everyone deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. Regardless of their bank account or their circumstances, Cassian Sterling had forgotten that truth, and it had destroyed him. Rylan had remembered it, and it had saved him. That difference, that simple, essential difference, was worth more than all the money in the world.